Now, in the case of a shark, this one, what they are doing is that they have the arteries and veins. What they're trying to do. Well, this is a tuna up here. What they're trying to do is they have the outside layers are cooler because they're associated with the environment, and they only maintain the internal core layer as their warmer layer. So remembering that a tuna is an ectotherm. So this is kind of how they would do it. And in the great white shark, what is happening is basically still that counter current, because you're having the capillaries the muscles are working, and the arteries and veins are running next to each other, and the arteries are maintaining the heat a little bit. The veins are returning back and picking up some of the heat. But basically, the heat is maintained again in the core because the shark is also an ectotherm. All right, so this is kind of what they do. They keep the internal parts and where all the organs are and everything warm, but everything else is on the colder side. All right. All right, so all of those were examples of thermoregulation. Another way to do thermoregulation is through evaporation. And we talked about that with that last one, but then there's a few other things. So, besides the evaporation of water, you can also use sweating. So for example, we sweat and we get water on our skin and it evaporates, and then that allows us to cool down. And you may be able to think of some other things. You can also do behavioral things like putting yourself on a rock, for example, or in water if you are a land animal or something like that. I know I go to the beach when I'm hot, or to the springs, and try to cool off. But you can do things like there's other things that organisms do. For example, hibernation. You might have seen some of the pictures recently on Facebook about bears coming out of hibernation. That is where their body and metabolism, basal metabolic rate, goes way, way, way down, and they have the only bare minimum of functions. They don't eat, they don't really drink, they don't do anything. They are just basically asleep for a long period of time, and when they come out of that, they're voraciously hungry. So the hibernation, though, is like a way of shutting down in places where it's very, very cold, or in some cases very, very hot, like the desert or something like that. There's also migration, moving from places that are very cold to very, very warm, or vice versa. And a lot of times that's following the food sources. So food sources will be different or kind of more constant in temperate areas. So they're just following that temperate line up and down depending on the seasons. And they can use things like burrowing, going down into the ground. The ground is always the average ambient temperature of a region. For example, around here, 72 degrees, 73 going up. And then things like huddling, so getting together. You might have done that yourself at a bus stop or something like that with your friends, or sunning or putting yourself in the shade. All right, and then you can also adjust your metabolic rate. You can do things like muscle activity, like shivering, for example, or just moving around. You can do what they call non-shivering thermogenesis, and you can have something called brown fat. Brown fat is a specialized fat for heat production. It's usually kind of around the neck, and it will be broken down and produce heat with that breakdown like to help you maintain your temperature. Okay, so in all of that, thermoregulation can be maintained through your brain. So let's talk about one last thing, and then we will be finished with this subject. Let me put it on the board here. trying to get it all on there. Hopefully you guys can see this. If you cannot, this is in your book. So let's say we have internal body temperature we want to maintain. So this is be an endothermic kind of organism. So let's say I have an increased body temperature when I'm exercising or I'm in the sun or something like that. What happens is my brain, the thermostat and my hypothalamus will set on cooling mechanisms. One thing is I will have sweat glands making more sweat, and that can, through evaporation, cool me down. Or I'm going to dilate my capillaries and my blood capillaries near my skin. That allows the blood to have more of a cooling effect by this evaporation, and that will bring my body temperature down somewhat. So this is why you sweat and get red when you're hot. The other way is if I have a decreased body temperature, again, my brain is going through the hypothalamus, is going to do things like constrict my blood vessels and or make my muscles move rapidly, so that or constrict, so that it's kind of making the more heat in that circulation, and so it generates heat, and then that's going to increase my body temperature and hopefully keep my homeostasis occurring. All right, so next time we will talk about the adjusting to temperature changes. Actually, we could finish this out. So you can do seasonal adjustments to temperature changes. So, that would be things like adjusting the amount of insulation. So we talked about like having, for example, extra undercoat for your dog or cat or something like that. And then when it gets warmer, they lose that or shed. You can have things like adjustments that are based on quick changes in temperature, so it's like very fast. So things that are in that category are torpor. Torpor is when the activity level goes way down. Basically, this is like when you see things that are like iguanas or something like that they're just sitting in a tree when it's really, really cold, because they're basically shutting themselves down somewhat because it's so cold. Hibernation that we just talked about. Estivation, which is a summer torpor, so that has to do with hot. So I'm going to write this down. Torpor. Estivation, and that is a summer just low activity because it's too hot to move. And then some animals have a daily torpor. And this would be like bats, for example. So bats during the day, they go inside, they hang out where it's kind of cooler and so forth, and then they come out in the evening or at night, or some hummingbirds do that as well. All right, so that's it for the temperature regulation. So we will be talking about digestion next lecture.